It was late, the gym almost empty, the air filled only with the quiet hum of machines cooling down. I thought I was the last one there, drenched in sweat, lost in my own thoughts. But then I noticed him, the janitor, moving slowly across the floor with a mop in hand, eyes catching mine for just a second longer than expected. Something shifted inside me, something I couldn't name yet. Alone in that silent space, I realized this night was not going to end the way I thought it would. The gym always felt like my escape, a place where I could shut out the world and focus only on the rhythm of my breathing, the strain in my muscles, the sound of weights clanging in the distance. That night, though, it felt different. The lights were dimmer than usual, the place quieter, almost haunting. Most people had already left, their voices fading like echoes in my mind. I lingered because staying meant I didn't have to return home to silence, to the feeling of being invisible even in my own apartment. I moved through each set slowly, almost deliberately, as if dragging out the minutes could fill the emptiness inside me. The sweat rolled down my neck, my arms trembled, but I kept pushing, pretending that the physical pain was the only thing I had to worry about. Yet the truth was, I had been carrying a different kind of weight for years, a secret about who I was, a fear of being judged, a longing for something real that always felt out of reach. That was when I noticed him. He was across the room, near the far wall, pushing a mop back and forth with an easy rhythm. The janitor. I had seen him before, always quiet, always in the background, almost blending into the walls. But that night there was no one else to look at, and somehow my eyes kept falling on him. He was older than me, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges and broad shoulders that made his uniform stretch just enough to reveal the strength underneath. His movements were unhurried, but there was something confident in the way he carried himself, like he knew the world rarely noticed him but he noticed everything. For a moment, our eyes met. Just a flicker, nothing more. But it was enough to make my pulse quicken. I dropped my gaze quickly, embarrassed, but I could still feel the heat rising in my chest. I told myself I was imagining things, that he hadn't really looked at me in any special way. Yet as I continued lifting, I could sense his presence in the background, quiet but constant, like the steady beat of a drum I couldn't ignore. I tried to focus on my workout, but every time I exhaled, my eyes drifted back to him. There was something in his face, calm, maybe a little tired, but kind too. He didn't look at me with judgment, not the way others sometimes did when they suspected parts of me I never dared to say out loud. His look felt different. It felt safe. And in that safety, my mind wandered to dangerous places, imagining things I would never dare to admit. My water bottle was nearly empty, and I made my way to refill it at the fountain near where he was cleaning. The closer I got, the louder my heartbeat became, almost drowning out the hum of the machines shutting down for the night. He glanced up as I approached, and this time he held my gaze for more than a second. His eyes were deep, unreadable, but they softened when he gave me a small nod. Just a nod, nothing more, but it felt like an entire conversation had passed between us. I muttered a quiet, thanks, as I bent down to drink, though I wasn't even sure what I was thanking him for. The silence between us was strange, not uncomfortable but heavy, like there was something unspoken floating in the air. When I straightened up, I caught him still watching me, though he quickly looked away and returned to his mop. I stood there longer than I needed to, filling my bottle more slowly than usual, just to prolong the moment. It was ridiculous, I thought, to be so affected by someone I barely knew, someone who was just doing his job while I was inventing entire stories in my head. But there was a pull, undeniable and strong, that told me this was not just another ordinary night. I returned to the bench, pretending to finish my workout, but my body was already tired. What kept me there was not the weights or the sets, it was him, the janitor, the quiet man whose presence filled the empty gym more than any crowd could. Every scrape of his mop against the floor, every time his shoes squeaked softly, felt like it was meant for me alone. And in that strange, silent connection, a thought crept into my mind that I couldn't push away. Maybe being seen, truly seen, wasn't as impossible as I had always believed. I sat on the bench pretending to finish another set, but my arms were already trembling from exhaustion, and my thoughts were nowhere near the weights in my hands. They were all tangled around him. The janitor moved slowly across the polished floor, humming something faint that I couldn't make out. It wasn't the kind of humming people do to fill silence. It sounded almost like he was keeping himself company, lost in his own world. Every now and then, he paused to wring the mop, his forearms flexing under the harsh fluorescent light. I tried not to stare, but my eyes betrayed me, lingering too long, tracing details I had no right to notice. There was something grounding about him. Maybe it was the way he seemed completely at peace with the quiet, as if he didn't need anyone to validate his presence. I had spent so much of my life chasing approval, twisting myself into someone I wasn't just to be accepted, and here was this man who looked like he belonged simply by existing. That kind of confidence, the silent kind, was magnetic to me. When I finally stood up, wiping sweat from my forehead with my towel, I realized he was watching me. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that felt intentional. Like he was really seeing me, noticing details others never bothered to. Our eyes met again, and this time I didn't look away so quickly. It lasted only a few seconds, but in those seconds, something shifted. I felt exposed, as if he could see past the layers I kept wrapped around myself, but instead of fear, I felt a strange relief. Almost like I had been waiting for someone to see me this way. I walked past him toward the locker rooms, and he moved slightly to the side, giving me space, but there was a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I don't know why that smile stayed with me, but it did. Inside the locker room, I splashed cold water on my face, trying to calm the storm inside me. I told myself I was imagining things, that he probably looked at everyone like that I was reading into something simple because I was lonely. And I was lonely. The kind of lonely that eats at you late at night, when your bed feels too big, when you can't remember the last time someone touched your hand just to hold it. That loneliness had been my shadow for years, and sometimes I wondered if it would ever leave me. When I walked back out, he was near the vending machine, taking a short break. He held a bottle of water in his hand, the cap off, and when our eyes met again, he nodded toward the machine. "These things eat your money sometimes," he said, his voice low, steady, surprisingly gentle for a man who looked so strong. It was the first time I had heard him speak, and something in me stirred. I laughed softly, almost nervously, and replied, "Yeah, I've had that happen before." Thought it was just me. His smile grew a little, and for a moment, it felt like we were sharing something small but intimate, a piece of normal connection that I hadn't expected to find here. I leaned against the wall, pretending to scroll through my phone, but really I was stealing glances at him, memorizing the way he drank from the bottle, the way his jaw tightened as if he was holding back words. I wanted to ask his name, but the question stuck in my throat. What right did I have to pry into his life when he probably saw me as just another guy passing through the gym? Yet something about him told me he wouldn't mind. When he finished his water, he tossed the bottle neatly into the bin and picked up his mop again. The spell almost broke, and I thought that was the end of it, just a brief exchange destined to fade. But then he looked back over his shoulder, his eyes locking onto mine once more, and he said softly, "You train hard. Most people don't push themselves like that." I froze, caught between pride and embarrassment. No one ever noticed me that way, not in the gym, not outside, not anywhere. I swallowed hard before replying, "Thanks. I guess it's easier to push my body than deal with everything else." As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Too honest, too revealing. But instead of awkwardness, I saw understanding in his eyes, a kind of recognition that made my chest ache. He didn't say anything else, just gave a small nod, but that silence carried more weight than any words could. I gathered my things slowly, unwilling to leave, every step toward the door heavier than it should have been. I didn't want the night to end, not with questions burning in my mind, not with this strange new electricity between us. As I reached the exit, I glanced back one last time. He was still there, mop in hand, but his eyes followed me until I disappeared through the doors. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. And that feeling stayed with me long after I walked into the night air, leaving me both terrified and hopeful of what might come next. The next day I tried to convince myself that nothing had really happened, that the look in his eyes, the few words we had exchanged, were just normal, casual moments that I had blown out of proportion because of my loneliness. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about him. His face kept coming back to me at random times, the curve of his smile, the way his voice had sounded low and calm, the nod he had given me like he understood something about me I hadn't said out loud. It wasn't just attraction, though that was there too, quietly pulsing under my skin. It was the feeling of connection, the sense that for the first time in a long while someone had actually noticed me. I had been invisible for so long that the smallest act of attention felt like a spark that lit up a dark room. That night I found myself heading back to the gym later than usual, hoping, though I wouldn't admit it, that he would be there again. The place was nearly empty, the same kind of quiet as the night before, machines humming like background music, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. I set my bag down, but my eyes were already searching the corners. And then I saw him. He was by the back wall, rearranging cleaning supplies, his shirt sleeves rolled up, showing strong forearms dusted with faint scars, the kind of marks that told stories without words. He noticed me almost immediately, and this time he didn't just give me a nod. He smiled, not wide, but enough to let me know he remembered me too. That simple smile made something twist in my chest, a mix of nerves and anticipation. I started my workout, trying to focus, but it felt impossible with him in the same space. Every rep felt like I was performing under his gaze, even though he wasn't openly watching me. But I knew he was aware. I could feel it, like an invisible thread between us. After about 30 minutes, I went to grab some water and found him closer than I expected, wiping down a nearby bench. He looked up as I approached, and without hesitation he said, "You're back late again. Guess you like the quiet too." His voice was warm this time, less guarded, and I felt my shoulders loosen a little. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my tone casual, "I guess it's easier to be myself when no one's around." As soon as I said it, I realized how vulnerable it sounded, but he didn't laugh or look confused. Instead, he nodded slowly, as though he understood exactly what I meant. There was silence for a moment, but it wasn't heavy, it was comfortable, like we were both standing in an unspoken agreement. He leaned against his mop handle and tilted his head slightly. "Most people don't like being alone," he said. "They fill the space with noise. But you seem like you carry silence with you." The way he said it didn't feel like an observation. It felt like he was describing a truth about me that I hadn't admitted to anyone. I felt my throat tighten, and I didn't know what to say. So I just shrugged, forcing a small laugh. Maybe that's just another way of saying I'm bad at talking to people. He smiled again, softer this time, and replied, "You're talking to me, aren't you?" Those words hit me harder than they should have. It was such a simple statement, but it cracked something open inside me. I realized how much I had missed moments like this, moments where conversation didn't feel like effort, where someone actually wanted to hear what I had to say. We talked a little more, nothing deep at first. He told me he'd been working at the gym for a couple of years, that the night shifts were quieter and gave him time to think. I told him about my training routine, how I used the gym to deal with stress I couldn't really talk about. There was no judgment in his eyes, no sign that he was bored or pretending. He listened, really listened, and that made me want to keep speaking, to keep giving pieces of myself I usually kept hidden. At one point, I caught myself staring at his hands as he leaned on the mop, and I had to quickly look away, afraid he would notice the heat rising in my face. But when I glanced back, he wasn't smirking or pulling away, he was still looking at me with the same steady, calm expression, as though he was patient enough to wait for me to find the words I was too afraid to say. The rest of the gym felt like it had faded away. The machines, the mirrors, the clock on the wall, they all blurred into the background. It was just the two of us, standing in the middle of an empty space, filling the silence with something neither of us could name yet. When I finally picked up my bag to leave, I hesitated at the door, half hoping he would stop me. He didn't, but his eyes followed me until I stepped outside, and that alone was enough to leave me restless the entire night. I lay awake in bed replaying every detail, every look, every word. It was dangerous to let myself hope, but I couldn't help it. For the first time in years, I wanted to go back, not for the gym, not for the workout, but for him. The following night I told myself I wasn't going to the gym. I even tried to distract myself by cooking a late dinner and putting on some background music, but nothing worked. My mind kept circling back to him, the janitor with the quiet smile and the eyes that felt like they saw more of me than anyone ever had. By 9, I gave up pretending and grabbed my bag. I told myself it was for the workout, but deep down I knew better. The gym was nearly empty again, just as I expected. The hum of the lights filled the silence, and the faint smell of disinfectant lingered in the air. I dropped my bag by the usual bench and scanned the room, and there he was, already at work, sweeping in slow, steady strokes, his posture relaxed as though he owned the quiet. When his eyes met mine, his face lit with a subtle recognition, like he had been waiting for me. That look made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. I began lifting, trying to focus on the repetition, but the pull was stronger tonight. It felt like every movement I made was mirrored by his presence, every breath carrying the awareness that he was just a few steps away. When I finally set the weights down, my body gave into exhaustion, but my mind stayed restless, full of questions I had no courage to ask. After a while, he came closer, pushing his cart of supplies near my bench. He stopped for a moment, leaning on the handle, and asked, "Rough day?" His voice was low but warm, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to carry weight. I nodded, wiping sweat from my forehead. Yeah. Just one of those days where everything feels heavier than usual. He didn't press, didn't ask for details, but the way he looked at me made me feel like I had already said enough. That simple acknowledgement was more comforting than any advice could have been. I found myself sitting on the edge of the bench, towel draped over my shoulders, talking to him without thinking. I told him how work had been draining, how people around me seemed to expect me to be someone I wasn't, how I had been carrying this silent pressure for years. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and a part of me panicked, afraid I had said too much. But he just listened, his gaze steady, his expression calm. When I paused, embarrassed by my own honesty, he said quietly, "Sometimes the hardest weight isn't on your shoulders. It's the one you don't let anyone see." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. It felt like he had reached inside and pulled out the truth I had been avoiding for so long. My throat tightened, and I didn't know what to say back, so I just nodded. He gave me a small smile then, almost reassuring, and continued wiping the nearby equipment. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was almost soothing, like being near him was enough to ease the storm in my head. As he moved around the room, we kept exchanging little comments, about music, about how late-night workouts made the gym feel like a different world, about the strange comfort of routine. Each word built a bridge between us, something fragile but real. I noticed the way his laugh rumbled low in his chest, the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, and it made me want to know everything about him. His name, his life, his story. I wanted to ask, but I held back, afraid that if I pushed too far, the delicate thread between us might snap. When it was time to leave, I lingered again, packing my bag slower than necessary. He noticed, I could tell, but he didn't call me out on it. Instead, as I walked past him toward the exit, he spoke softly, almost as if he wasn't sure whether to say it or not. "See you tomorrow." It was just 3 words, but they carried a weight that made my heart stumble. I managed a small smile and said, "Yeah. Tomorrow." The words felt like a promise, though I wasn't sure what I was promising. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin, but inside I burned with something I hadn't felt in years, a mix of anticipation, fear, and hope. That simple exchange had changed everything. It was no longer just about the gym, or about escaping my loneliness. It was about him. And for the first time in a long time, I wanted tomorrow to come faster. The next day felt unbearably long. Work dragged on, every email and meeting blurring together while my mind drifted elsewhere. I couldn't focus, couldn't keep myself from replaying his words over and over again. "See you tomorrow." The way he had said it wasn't casual, it carried intention, a quiet certainty that he expected me to return. And that small invitation had changed everything. For once, I didn't feel like a background character in my own life. I felt wanted. Needed, even. All day I wrestled with what it meant. Was I imagining it? Was I desperate enough for connection that I was reading too much into a few looks, a few words? But then I thought of the way his eyes lingered, the way his voice softened when he spoke to me, and I knew there was something there. Something fragile, but real. By the time night came, I was restless. I threw my gym clothes into my bag and headed out, my heart racing with equal parts excitement and dread. I told myself to calm down, to just treat it like another night, another workout. But deep down, I knew I wasn't going for the weights or the treadmill anymore. I was going for him. When I walked in, he was already there, mopping near the entrance. The moment our eyes met, he gave me that small smile, and it was enough to make my whole body exhale. It felt like recognition, like he had been waiting. I nodded back, trying not to seem too eager, and made my way to the weights, though I barely paid attention to what I was doing. The entire time, I could feel him moving around the room, cleaning, organizing, occasionally glancing my way. It was like a dance, subtle but deliberate, and with every look exchanged, the space between us seemed to shrink. Eventually, he came closer, wiping down the bench near where I was stretching. He leaned on the handle of his mop for a moment and asked, "So, did the day feel lighter, or just heavy again?" His question caught me off guard, but in a good way. He remembered what I had said the night before, about the weight I carried that wasn't visible. I swallowed and admitted, heavy. Lighter now, though. The corner of his mouth curved upward as if he understood exactly what I meant without needing me to explain. That unspoken understanding filled me with warmth I hadn't felt in so long. We started talking again, small at first, then gradually deeper. I asked him about his shifts, about how he ended up working nights. He told me it wasn't what he had planned for his life, but it gave him peace, time to think, and money to pay the bills without being trapped in the noise of the day. He liked the quiet, he said, because quiet gave him space to breathe. I told him I felt the same way, though I admitted that sometimes my quiet turned into loneliness. He didn't laugh at me or look uncomfortable. Instead, he said, loneliness isn't the same as being alone. Alone can feel peaceful. Lonely just hurts. I get it. His words dug into me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I wanted to ask him what loneliness he had known, what stories were hidden in his silence, but I held back. Instead, I nodded, and for a moment, it felt like we shared something unspoken but deeply personal, something that tied us together. As the minutes stretched into an hour, I noticed the way his shoulders seemed less tense when he talked to me, how his laugh came easier. I noticed the faint lines around his eyes when he smiled, like someone who had lived through more than he admitted. And every detail made me want to stay longer. When I finally set my weights down and sat, catching my breath, he walked over with a rag in hand, pretending to wipe the nearby machine. He glanced at me and asked, almost carefully, "Do you ever feel like this place is more than a gym?" I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He looked around at the empty space, the dim lights, the mirrors reflecting us back at ourselves. "Like it's not about the workout. It's about leaving everything else outside. Like in here, you can just exist without pretending." His words resonated so deeply that I almost forgot to breathe. That was exactly what the gym had been for me, a sanctuary, a place where I could strip away the masks and just be. Hearing him say it felt like he had reached into my chest and named something I hadn't been able to. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and said quietly, "Yeah. Exactly that." For a long moment, we just looked at each other, the silence between us carrying more than words could. It felt dangerous, the kind of moment where one wrong move could break everything, but it also felt alive. My chest burned with the urge to say something more, to ask him if he felt the same pull I did, but my courage faltered. Instead, I gathered my bag slowly, wishing the night could stretch just a little longer. As I walked toward the exit, he surprised me by calling out, "Hey." I turned, and he hesitated, as if weighing whether to speak, before finally saying, "I'm glad you came back tonight." My breath caught in my throat, but I managed to nod, whispering, "Me too," before stepping out into the cool night air. The door closed behind me, but my heart stayed inside with him, thundering with the realization that something was happening between us. Something I couldn't ignore anymore. The next day felt unbearable in its anticipation. Every hour at work crawled, every conversation with coworkers felt empty, every task seemed meaningless compared to the thought of seeing him again. It was strange, almost frightening, how quickly he had taken over my thoughts. For so long I had been used to silence, to routine, to living like a ghost moving through my own life, unnoticed and unremarkable. And then suddenly, with just a few glances and words, he had made me feel alive again. I told myself not to get carried away, not to build castles in my head out of looks and quiet smiles, but the truth was I couldn't stop. I wanted to know everything about him. I wanted to hear his story, to understand the pain hidden in the soft edges of his eyes, to uncover why he seemed to understand my loneliness so easily. That night, I didn't even pretend I was going to the gym for the workout. I walked in with my bag, but my focus wasn't on the machines or the weights. It was on him. And there he was, already there, moving across the floor with the same calm rhythm, his sleeves rolled up, his eyes lifting the moment I stepped through the door. That look, recognition mixed with something softer, sent a rush of warmth through me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere, even if it was just in his gaze. I started my routine, but my movements were distracted, clumsy. He must have noticed because after a while, he came closer, leaning casually against the handle of his mop. "You're not really focused tonight," he said, almost teasing but without judgment. I laughed nervously, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Yeah, I guess my mind's somewhere else." His eyes lingered on mine, steady and searching, and for a moment I thought he might ask where my mind was, but he didn't. Instead, he said, "Sometimes that's the body's way of telling you it needs rest. Or maybe it just needs something different." There was something in the way he said, something different, that made my stomach tighten. It felt like more than casual advice. It felt like an opening, a subtle invitation to step beyond the safe boundary we had been circling around. I swallowed hard, torn between fear and desire, but I didn't answer. I just nodded, letting the silence hang between us like a secret. Later, as I was stretching near the far wall, he came over with a rag and began wiping down the machine next to me. We were close enough now that I could smell the faint scent of soap on his clothes, mixed with something earthy, something undeniably him. My chest tightened at the nearness, at the way his presence filled the space around me. He spoke quietly, almost like he was confessing something. You know, most people don't notice me here. They walk past, don't even look. Sometimes I think I could disappear and nobody would care. His words hit me so hard I had to stop stretching. I turned to look at him, my voice low, unsteady. I notice you. The silence that followed was heavy, charged, like the entire gym had gone still waiting for his response. He glanced at me, his lips parting slightly as if he hadn't expected me to say it, and in his eyes I saw a flicker of something raw, something vulnerable. It was only a second, but it was enough. I knew then that he wasn't just a quiet janitor doing his job. He was a man carrying his own loneliness, his own silence, and somehow we had found each other in it. He didn't reply, just gave me a small nod, but it felt like an acknowledgement of something bigger, something unspoken between us. We moved through the rest of the night in that quiet, magnetic pull, speaking in fragments, laughing softly at little things, sharing more of ourselves in the spaces between words than in the words themselves. When it was time to leave, I hesitated again, my bag slung over my shoulder, the door only a few steps away. I wanted to say something more, something honest and undeniable, but the words stuck in my throat. As I turned to go, his voice stopped me. "Hey," he said, and when I looked back, he was standing there, his mop forgotten at his side. "Be safe out there." It was simple, almost ordinary, but the way he said it, the warmth in his tone, made it feel like more than just a farewell. It felt like care. I nodded, whispering, "You too," before stepping out into the cool night air. My body was tired, but my heart was racing. The city streets felt different, alive in a way they hadn't before. I knew then that this was no longer about chance encounters. This was something growing, something undeniable. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of where it might lead. I was only afraid of what it would mean if I let it slip away. The next evening I arrived at the gym earlier than usual, restless from a day of carrying thoughts I couldn't shake. My chest had been heavy since morning, not from doubt, but from a growing ache to understand him more deeply. The curiosity was no longer casual, it was hunger. He was no longer just a face in the background of my nights. He had become the center, the gravity pulling me back every time. When I walked through the doors, I found him already there again, kneeling to scrub a stubborn stain from the floor. He looked up immediately, his expression softening as soon as he saw me. That look felt like home, and I realized how much I had come to crave it. It was no longer subtle. It was recognition, familiarity, maybe even something tender. I dropped my bag and pretended to set up for my workout, but my focus was gone before I even touched the weights. He noticed. He always noticed. After a while, he walked closer, leaning against the cleaning cart, arms crossed over his chest. "You've been coming here a lot lately," he said, not accusing, but curious. His tone carried something deeper, like he was trying to ask me a question without actually saying it. I forced a small laugh, though my throat was dry. "Guess I like the quiet," I said, though both of us knew that wasn't the full truth anymore. He tilted his head, studying me, and then gave a small, almost knowing smile. "Or maybe you like the company." The words landed like a weight in my stomach. They hung in the air between us, daring me to either deny or admit them. I wanted to respond, but my courage wavered. Still, the silence that followed was answer enough, because he didn't look away. He kept his eyes on me, steady and unflinching, and in that gaze I felt something shifting, something breaking open. We spent the next hour closer than we ever had been before. He stayed near where I was lifting, not hovering, but always within reach. Our conversations were longer, slower, weaving in and out of small confessions. I told him how the gym was my escape from feeling invisible, how I often carried secrets I couldn't share with anyone. He didn't push for details, but when he spoke, his voice was low, filled with a weight that matched my own. "I know what it's like to hide pieces of yourself," he said. "To go through the day acting like you're fine, while inside you're screaming for someone to notice." His words pierced straight through me. My hands shook slightly as I gripped the towel around my neck. For years, I had carried my silence like armor, convincing myself no one could understand. And here he was, not just noticing, but naming it. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in that struggle. I felt seen in a way that almost frightened me. As the night wore on, the distance between us closed more and more. He no longer spoke with the guarded politeness of a worker to a stranger. He spoke like a man letting walls down, brick by brick. He told me he used to dream of different things, bigger things, but life had led him here. He didn't say it with bitterness, but with quiet acceptance, though I could hear the faint ache behind it. I wanted to reach out, to touch his arm, to tell him that where he was mattered, that who he was mattered, but my hands stayed at my sides. Words weren't enough, but fear kept me from going further. Eventually, the gym was almost completely silent. My bag sat ready by the door, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Neither could he, it seemed, because he lingered near me, dragging out the last of his tasks. When our eyes met again, the air between us shifted, charged with something undeniable. He took a small step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You said last night that you noticed me. Nobody's said that to me in a long time." My chest tightened, my breath caught, but I managed to answer, my voice shaking, "Because it's true. I see you. I've been seeing you." The words felt like a release, a confession I had been holding back for too long. His eyes softened, almost shining under the harsh fluorescent lights, and for a long moment we just stood there, the silence louder than any words. Something was building, fragile but powerful, pressing against the edges of both our fears. I didn't move, but every fiber of me wanted to. My heart was hammering, my palms were damp, and yet, in that suspended second, it felt like the world outside the gym had ceased to exist. It was only him and me, standing in the quiet, our truths colliding in the space between us. When I finally shouldered my bag and turned to leave, he didn't stop me, but his eyes followed me all the way to the door. Just as I reached it, he spoke again, voice low but steady. "Same time tomorrow?" The question wasn't casual anymore. It carried meaning, a promise, maybe even hope. I turned back, meeting his gaze with a small, trembling smile. "Yeah. Tomorrow." And as I stepped out into the cool night air, I realized my life was no longer orbiting around loneliness. It was orbiting around him. And tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The following day felt different from the very beginning. It wasn't just anticipation this time, it was a quiet certainty that whatever was building between us was going to change something in me forever. Work and the hours that followed passed in a blur, every moment filled with the thought of him. I wasn't imagining anymore, I wasn't inventing a story in my head. He had asked me to come back, he had made it clear in his quiet way that he wanted me there. That knowledge stayed with me like a pulse, steady and alive. By the time I walked through the gym doors, my heart was racing but my steps were steady. I knew exactly who I was there for. He was already there, standing near the entrance with a rag in his hand, wiping down a counter. The instant our eyes met, he stopped what he was doing, and for a second neither of us moved. Then he smiled, small, almost hesitant, but real. That smile made the air feel lighter. I dropped my bag by the bench but didn't even bother pretending I was there to work out this time. My body was restless, but my mind was focused only on him. He noticed, of course he did, and instead of keeping his distance, he walked over and leaned against the cleaning cart like he had been waiting for me. "Rough day?" he asked again, the same question as before, but this time his tone carried something more intimate, like he already knew the answer. I shook my head. Not rough. Just long. But better now. His eyes softened, and for a moment he didn't say anything, just studied me in that way he always did, like he was seeing past everything I tried to hide. I wanted to fill the silence, but I couldn't. My throat was tight, my chest too full. He broke it instead, his voice low and certain. You've been carrying a lot, haven't you? I swallowed hard, nodding. Yeah. For a long time. Me too, he said simply, and those two words felt like a bridge between us. We stood there, neither of us pretending anymore, the weight of our loneliness laid bare in the open space. And then something shifted. He stepped closer, not much, just enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, enough that I could catch the faint scent of soap mixed with sweat and something earthy that was his alone. My chest tightened, and my hands itched with the urge to reach for him, but fear held me back. What if I ruined this? What if I broke the fragile connection we had built? But he must have sensed my hesitation, because his voice dropped even lower, steady but soft. You don't have to pretend around me. Those words broke me open. My eyes burned, my throat ached, and for a moment I couldn't speak. All I could do was breathe, shaky and uneven, as the truth I had buried for years clawed its way to the surface. I've been hiding who I am, I whispered, barely able to get the words out. I've been so scared of what people would think, of what it would mean if anyone really knew me. And I'm tired. I'm so tired of being invisible. The confession hung in the air, raw and trembling, and for a second I thought he might look away, might let the silence swallow it whole. But instead, he stepped closer again, his eyes steady, his voice filled with quiet strength. You're not invisible to me. My chest cracked wide open at that. Years of silence, years of carrying a secret alone, years of convincing myself I didn't deserve to be seen, it all came undone in that one sentence. Without thinking, I reached out, my hand brushing against his arm, and when he didn't pull away, when his body leaned ever so slightly into mine, the fear melted into something else. Something fierce and undeniable. We stood like that for what felt like forever, two men in an empty gym, the world outside forgotten. There were no machines, no clocks, no walls around us, just the raw, simple truth of being seen and seeing someone else in return. When I finally found my voice again, it was quiet but certain. I don't want to keep pretending anymore. Not with you. His lips curved into the faintest smile, and he placed his hand gently over mine, his touch steady and grounding. Then don't, he said. It wasn't a grand speech or a dramatic moment. It was simple, honest, and exactly what I needed. That night, I didn't leave the gym with the same emptiness I had carried for years. I left with something new, a flicker of hope, a sense of belonging, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to face the world alone anymore. The silence that had always haunted me no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like possibility. And for the first time in my life, tomorrow didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to look forward to, because I knew he would be there, and I knew I wasn't invisible anymore.